right, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar with Fullscript and Symphony Natural Health. My name's Kaylee. I'm the Marketing Operations Coordinator here at Fullscript, and we're very excited to have Dr. Maca Fahoum here today to help us understand the different phenotypes of Maca, or how the different phenotypes of Maca produce different physiological effects. As I said, yes, very excited, but before we get into the presentation, I just want to go over a little housekeeping. Everyone who registered for this webinar will be given an email with access to the recording, so you'll be able to go back, watch it again whenever you'd like. It also lives on fullscript.com/webinars, so you're welcome to always check out the webinars there, and you can access all of our past and upcoming webinars there as well. Throughout the webinar too, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the questions section on your control panel or dashboard. This will be a packed webinar, so we most likely won't have time to get to a live Q&A at the end, but what we can do is collect the questions and send that in a follow-up as well. So the questions can be answered, just potentially not live today. So yes, again, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Fahoum, for being here today with us. If you're just joining us for the first time in one of the Fullscript webinars, we have done past webinars with Symphony Natural Health and Dr. Fahoum. So as I said, you can check those out on our website. I'll also put a link in the chat so people can access them as well. And if you don't know, Dr. Fahoum is a naturopathic doctor who specializes in women's health across all ages. From hormonal issues and digestive concerns to sports medicine and nutrition, she has a personalized approach, creating a unique plan for each patient. She has been in private practice at Meridian Medicine in Seattle for over 15 years, and she is the Director of Clinical Services at Bastyr University, and most recently, the past president of the Washington Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And outside of work, she is a mom, a wife, an avid snowboarder, a soccer player, and a CrossFitter, which is awesome. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Fahoum, and we'll get going with the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me today. And I'm presuming you can still see my screen so that we can go ahead and jump in here and talk about Symphony Natural Health. I think I might have to update my bio though, with the gym still being closed for the most part. I don't think CrossFit counts anymore. I'll have to switch it to gardening or something. Alrighty, so we are going to do a lot of stuff today. We are going to talk about Maca and Feminescence and how it really is a cut above other Maca preparations in how it's cultivated and the science behind all those different phenotypes and how we get different effects in the body. We'll talk about the line itself, and then we might actually talk a little bit about Herbitonin and a couple other things as well, because we all know that hormones are a symphony in the body, and hence the name of the company. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a few slides to go through today, so I'm going to skim over some of them and then dive into the other ones that are going to serve your practice clinically. You'll have all the info to refer back to, and on the company and the history and all those kinds of things. And I additionally want to invite you, if you want to go into one of the training webinars that we offer, you can always contact your sales rep and we can do that. And or the other service that we offer as a company that you may or may not know about is you have access to our medical team, myself and a colleague, Jan Roberts. You can always reach out to us with clinical questions, dosing questions, or any concerns, and we are happy to support you in that. So this, you can read our mission and vision statement. Our Director of Research and Development and co-founder, Dr. Henry Meisner, what's really unique about him is he's not a practitioner, and he's not taking pre-existing research and products to formulate another product. He designs and has a long history of designing novel products that have never existed before, and he has built 7 herbal extraction facilities around the world, and he's published more than 300 research papers, 18 books, and he's regarded as one of the foremost designers of natural products. So we're really proud to have him on our team. And then our founder, James Frame, he goes above and beyond. You can read his bio here, but he is beyond dedicated to providing researched and clinically efficacious products, and his commitment to education is unparalleled, both with practitioners, customers, potential patients, all of those folks, he values very highly that people understand their bodies and why we do the things we do. This is just an idea of the links that we go to in order to formulate and support our practitioners and end users. And we also have to update my photo. As you can see, I'm about 4 years or 5 years out on hair growth there. But we have a great team. Dr. Tori Hudson, many of you are probably familiar with. Dr. Tassone, Jan Roberts is in Australia, but she has written a number of books on fertility and preconception health, and she's on our medical team. And then many of you also probably know Mark Sklar and Corey Schuler as well. So how do we do it? The history, you can read about our history, but where I really want to start is with our overall operations and the fact that we are seed to shelf and we have vertical integration, meaning that we use our products and we start with controlling seed, how it's produced, how it's manufactured, all the way out to the end user. It's a big difference and not common in the industry. So the other pieces here you can see, we're going to work on producing the highest quality. We are dedicated to exploring the science and the research so that we can find the best country to grow something in, the best environment and soil, which we're actually going to get into in some detail here in just a few moments. And like I said, vertical integration. So whether we have operations in Australia or Peru, we're working again all the way from the seed, the growing conditions, all the way through to how we manufacture it and fulfill those orders. Dr. Tori Hudson here, this is one of the quotes that we're really proud of, and she works with us quite diligently to work on our product formulations. So how do we do it? Again, we are very committed and driven toward purity, where we grow, how we test, how we package to protect the active ingredients, and then the results. Studies showing that it's effective, studies that are going to help find out which exact active metabolites do we need to use, and then at what kind of dosing is going to be optimal to get there. All of those things are really important to us. And then of course, we're going to try to get all of the proper certifications, organic, kosher. We test for all the heavy metals. We're not adding any excipients. We only process the herb under heat and pressure, no chemical excipients used or solvents used to get the product made. And then, of course, social responsibility. It's had a huge impact on the Peruvian economy, Maca in and of itself, and our company. One of the things that we take great pride in is the commitment to that country and the people who grow our products. And rather than just a fair trade kickback, we try to create a value add industry so that we're creating year-round employment and we employ 100% local people. And then we're also going to work on our education and make sure we're educating people about our products as well. One of the things we're often asked is, how do we know so much about maca? And as you've heard, Dr. Meisner, he believes in research and he's doing it all the time and he has a long history of doing it. But in reviewing research on maca specifically, you'll find that 75 to 80% of the research on maca is authored by one of these three scientists. Dr. Gonzalez, who's the leading research and expert in maca for men, Dr. Chacon, who's regarded as the mother of maca in Peru, and Dr. Meisner, who has worked with both Drs. Gonzalez and Chacon, and he has also done more research on maca for women than any other scientist in the world. So we're really proud to have him on our team. Here is a link. You'll find us on our website as well, but this is a link to a number of research articles about maca and feminescence. One of the exciting things that's come out is, like we were talking about phenotypes today, the American Botanical Council and the USDA recently actually published a report validating our findings about maca phenotypes using mass spectral fingerprinting, metabolomic analysis, and genetic sequencing. And this is really groundbreaking, and we are really excited about it. As you'll see here, they verified the species. So you'll hear Lepidium mayani and Lepidium peruvianum. They're synonyms and the same species, but they looked at 39 different commercial maca supplements from different manufacturers and unprocessed maca tubers from 2 different locations in Peru and China. And they confirmed what we were finding in that different phenotypes or colors of maca and different places that they're grown, elevation, soil types, all made a difference with how many compound or how much of a compound, how concentrated, and different amounts of different types of compounds. As you'll see, 138 different compounds were identified in all of these samples. And then I have a few links here for you. One that I really like and would recommend is The Colors of Maca by Dr. Deanna Minnick. And she talks about how these different analytical profiles can cause different physiological effects in the body. So with Lepidium peruvianum, there are 13 different phenotypes, commonly called colors, the colors of maca. They can have the different color, not all of them are entirely different colors, but within those we found different DNA, different analytical profiles, as I mentioned before, and they can elicit very different physiological effects on the body. So what's interesting here too, and it goes back to the importance of the testing and how we manufacture, is even seeds that are identified as black, they came from the black maca, you think that's what you're going to plant and get, you may not actually get that when you propagate it, you may get a different color. So that chemical analysis differentiation is a key component, which we'll look at here in later slides. The other thing to think about here is if they have different physiological effects, it then goes to say that if you want to use maca for men's health and adrenal health, that may be very, very different phenotype of what you need to use than in women. Men, you don't need to increase estrogen. You want to balance testosterone, you want to work on adrenal support, cortisol, all those things. You don't want to raise estrogen. Whereas in postmenopausal women, the goal is to get estrogen and progesterone levels up and a whole different set of hormone balancing. So that's why these phenotypes can have huge impacts on what you're actually trying to accomplish in your patient. So moving on here, you can see that maca is very nutrient dense. You've got lots of amino acids, fiber, vitamins, B2, B6, niacin, iron. There's a number of things. So all of them we're going to find differing amounts, and some are similar, more similar than others within those profiles. But what's really interesting is that the secondary metabolites, where we see distinct differences observed between the phenotypes and the location of cultivation within those, they're also presumed to be really related to the health benefits of the maca. So as an example here with amino acids, on the right you see a thin layer chromatography, and it's showing that Feminescence here in wells 1 and 6 actually contains much higher levels of all the amino acids that you typically find in maca, even more than the 10-to-1 and 5-to-1 extracts of maca. And we know that amino acids are the building blocks for all of our hormones and neurotransmitters. So this is one of the reasons I think that we see a key to the success that we see with the Feminescence Pro is the fact that we have a huge amount of amino acids as active ingredient that we're putting into that maca product. The other big thing that we know about maca is the secondary metabolites with the glucosinolates. Maca is a part of the brassica family, so same as broccoli and collard greens and all of that. But we found that Feminescence, the concentrated form that we're working with of maca, is actually 400 times the amount of glucosinolates than that of broccoli or Brussels sprouts. And that's not a typo. We checked it numerous times because it was a little astounding to see. Of note here too is that of the 9 different glucosinolates that we see in maca, and they're generally grouped into a couple of families that we're going to see here in this slide, and you can see that again that the Feminescence here in the first and last wells contain a much higher concentration of both types of glucosinolate families, and most companies concentrate for one or the other, but we are working to concentrate for both. Again, something that I think is really important and what starts differentiating it from other maca products on the market. And the other piece to know here is that glucosinolates are very, very unstable. So when you're looking at how you package it and how you manage it, how you dry it, how you transport it, and then at your end stage, how you're going to encapsulate it, it gets very, very important to understand how the moisture and oxygen and heat are going to affect that, which is one of the reasons ours is blister packed, so that it's protected from all of those elements and we can deliver the full active ingredients that we're wanting to our patients. So I won't read this whole thing for you right now, but some highlights here and how we make sure we get the highest level of active ingredients and those secondary metabolites that we were just talking about. It really is a science of farming. So we know that where it's grown is hugely important. There are big differences between maca grown in Peru and China, where it's now also being cultivated. And this is partly what we also saw in the USDA and the American Botanical Council research. And then there's also, so a lot of that's going to be location and soil and environment, but also we found that elevation seems to play a major role in the amount of metabolites. And typically we see much higher metabolite levels the higher the elevation. And so higher efficacy, depending on how high of an elevation the maca was grown at. And that may also help explain some of the differences between maca grown in Peru versus China. As you'll see here, the elevations that typically they grow it in Peru is between 3,500 and 4,500 meters above sea level. And China, it's typically the maximum elevation is 3,180. So that may help explain some of the differences that we're seeing between the two. Additionally is soil, which anyone who's grown anything, even tomatoes, you know that soil matters. And apart from those concerns around contamination and pollution, which you really have to pay attention to because there's naturally occurring heavy metals, especially in Peru where there's been lava flows. So growing maca on one side of the mountain may result in an entirely different profile chemically speaking, as far as contaminants and stuff, than the other side of the mountain, which means when it comes to complying with like California Prop 65 or the European standards around heavy metals, it's really important to know where you're growing and how you're growing those things. And then last but not least, we have the cultivation methods. You've got traditional growing, which is what we do in Peru here on the side of the mountain, growing it how it's been grown for thousands of years. And then in China, you have typically more Western cultivation, straight rows. And for me as an herbal medicine practitioner, this makes a difference to me. I mean, it may be that in some herbs, the Western cultivation in straight rows is great and very controlled and you can manage it. But it turns out with the maca, we actually see better results and higher active ingredients when we grow it more traditionally. And we've mentioned this before, but drying methods are also very important. There's the traditional way using highland elevation during the day, and then you cover them at night. And then you see other more modern versions where you dry it at sea level, like in old tobacco dryers at higher temperatures. But all of that's going to affect your chemistry, which makes sense, right? The higher the heat or different ways of drying may break down one active ingredient and not another. So you really do have to look at what are you aiming to concentrate, and then what's the best way to get the highest concentration. And then we talked about the storage again. You need to be very careful about the storage. Again, the heat, the moisture, the oxygen, glucosinolates are going to break down very quickly. And so it's a lot of detail in making the product. And as a clinician, I don't think about that typically. But when you think about the biochemistry and the biology and gardening and farming that we've learned about, like in our botanical medicine training, it does make sense why we have to pay attention to this. And then with the humid environment in Peru and particularly, you do need to store that dried maca root at elevation. And then to avoid the mold and the breakdown of the active constituents, we will often only ship what's needed for encapsulation in small amounts to Lima at lower elevation for immediate manufacturing. It's quite interesting and very, very detailed. All right. So this is just a quick summary before we kind of move into another topic, but this is, looking at all these different active ingredients and secondary metabolites that we want to see in our maca. And then of course, all those different phenotypes, we also have to think about how it's grown and where it's grown. So you've got not only how is it processed and grown, but then you've got all the details about, is it red maca, yellow maca, black maca? Which one is going to get you the physiological effects that you want to see for your patient? So it's really important to know where your stuff is coming from. So let's dive in here. What is Maca Go? That is the active ingredient that we are working to concentrate. It's highly bioavailable nutraceutical, and it has a proprietary phenotype formulation, so that we can address those physiological needs at different stages of people's lives and women versus men. So Feminescence, as you probably know, doesn't introduce any hormones into the body. Rather, we're really trying to nourish the HPA axis and so much more to support the body's own hormone production and balance. You'll see this big long term here, because more and more we're thinking it's not just the hypothalamus pituitary axis. There's the pituitary, the thyroid, there's so many pieces to this hormone puzzle that we're just learning about. So really important to pay attention to that along the way as well. And then people always ask, what is the difference between all the different formulas? So this is a really nice, simple breakdown. Each of the women's formulas have Maca Go in them, but in different amounts, and that in conjunction with specific phenotypes for that woman's phase of life. And then, of course, with the Revolution for men, it doesn't have any Maca Go, but Maca OG, which is a different formulation with a different phenotype to support more men's adrenals and the male pathways. Because as we mentioned before, some species, or some phenotypes rather, some phenotypes of maca may actually and have actually been shown to increase the size of the prostate. Well, that is the opposite effect that you want to see in men. So you've got to make sure that the right phenotypes are in the men's formula to actually help reduce the size of the prostate and help with urinary flow and all those kinds of things. So just as a very hard, crystal clear kind of difference with your phenotypes and where that interplay comes with physiological effect and the phenotype that's put into that capsule. So again, it's designed to support the whole HPA axis, but potentially the entire endocrine system. What I always describe to patients is the fact that you could go get maca from the bulk section and throw it into a smoothie as a powder, but you're not going to have any idea what phenotypes are in that powder, or has it been gelatinized, like what's the bioavailability. And those, I often find, they're likely going to get some energy, and they're going to kind of support the adrenals, that lower part of the axis. But when we're looking to support the whole system and the hormonal cascade that's happening, especially with women, this is where the Feminescence shines, and you can actually trust that what you're getting is going to get a much broader range of clinical action. And here I've just broken down Feminescence versus raw maca. And if you want more details, you can always let me know here. But basically with your Feminescence, we're ticking all the boxes, working on bioavailability, concentrated, all that kind of stuff. We know clinically we see reduction in menopausal symptoms, which others can too, but you don't know all the other answers. And one of the things that we do know, like with gelatinized maca, managing some of the starches and breaking down some of those things make it much more gentle on the digestive tract, and then absorbed better and concentrate those metabolites. So there are differences between different types of maca. And then, of course, who's talking about it? A lot of people are talking about it. We have Dr. Christiane Northrup and Dr. Kelly Brogan. They've written books and mentioned the Feminescence, and along with other people at this point too. This is another really nice summary slide for everyone to just kind of understand the difference between what do we think Feminescence and that type of Maca Go can do compared to some of the other botanicals we might look to specifically here for menopause. So this is using the Cooperman and Green Index of Menopausal Symptoms and looking at what has clinical evidence or data behind it as to what it can help with. And we see here that the Feminescence has an impact on about 8.5 out of 10 women. It's not for everybody. It's just not going to solve every last person's problem, but 84–85% is pretty darn good compared to black cohosh, which has been shown to be effective in about 60% of patients. And then again, not all the symptoms are going to be covered. And then if you get out to the wild yam and the dong quai and the soy and the red clover with very little evidence behind it, you can quickly see why I represent this company, but also why I use this and have used it for over a decade in my practice, because I find it a really wonderful foundational support to the whole hormonal system so that I can generally get reduction and improvement kind of across the board of what's happening for people. And then if there's a few leftover things, maybe they're still having a few night sweats, or maybe there's something else that's still happening for them, I can then put things on top as needed. And so it's really kind of helps simplify my formulas, simplify the plan. I'm literally giving them one herb that seems to affect a bunch of different systems, and then I'll tack things on as needed on top of that. This is just another nice summary chart. I'll let you look at that a little bit later when the slides are sent to you, but this just looks at all the different mechanism of action between the botanicals in the previous slide, including maca, regular maca versus the maca go. So for reference, this is the product line that I've been referencing to in case you're not that familiar with it. And we're going to briefly kind of go through a bunch of these for you. And maybe we'll get to questions. If not, we will collect all those questions and I will answer them and we'll attach them to the slides afterwards, as Kaylee mentioned. So along with the Feminescence products that I've already talked about, the Pro, Post, Perry, and Harmony, and the Revolution for men, there's also the PhQuintessence, which is our alfalfa-based product for detox and alkalizing the system, and then our plant-based melatonin, the 0.3 and 3 milligram melatonin. First, we'll talk about the Feminescence line, since that's what we were just talking about the active ingredients and everything with. And I really like this graphic. I actually show it to patients at times because it helps them understand what's happening broadly in their body. So if you look at the white line, it actually helps explain to them, okay, I'm going through my cycle, estrogen and things spike, then they fall, then I have my period. And then when you hit perimenopause, it's all over the board. They're falling, but I tell them like the ovaries are sputtering, and 1 month they're listening and the next month they're not. So we have all these peaks and valleys in your hormones. And my goal in perimenopause, while we know the process is going to be fluctuation and the process is a shutting down and retiring of those ovaries, I want to bring those peaks and valleys together. So even while they're going to notice fluctuation and they're going to notice some irregular cycles, if we can bring those peaks and valleys together, their experience of the whole process is going to be much improved. And then, of course, you get into then menopause, which the ovaries have officially retired, and now we have low levels kind of across the board. So that will also help you clinically with which do I use when. Something I like to note here as well is people always wonder, well, I'm having perimenopausal symptoms. I started having some hot flashes, but I'm only 38. So the inclination for many people is to go to the Peri formula because they're having perimenopausal symptoms. But if you stop and think about it from your doctor brain or your clinician brain, they shouldn't be perimenopausal yet. They should still be having a nice, normal, regular cycle. So that what should be happening in their body is also kind of a directive as to which formula do you want to use. I want my gals menstruating and having normal, regular cycles like through their 40s. We know that's not always going to happen. There's obviously surgical menopause. Some people do have premature ovarian failure, in which case they're going to slide into different categories. But by and large, you should have a pretty normal cycle. The average age of menopause is about 52. So people are actually on the ProHarmony for longer than in my practice than they may be in some other people's, because I want the estrogen support. I want the bone support, the cardiovascular support. I want the brain support of their natural hormones as long as possible, then get them through perimenopause and then work to support those again postmenopausally for brain and heart and cardiac health. But I really want to see gals at 50 or 52 starting to need these. That's not always the case, but that's one way to think about what's really happening. Just because she's having night sweats doesn't mean I want to put her on the peri or post formula. But if it's appropriate, it's certainly appropriate. All right, so back to the slides here. I get excited and deviate on the clinical stuff. So let's talk about the Feminescence Pro post-menopause formula. Again, this is for women who are fully postmenopausal, meaning they haven't had a cycle for a year, or they're potentially post-surgical. Even if they're younger, oftentimes this is what you're going to need because it's formulated with the Maca Go, and it's going to have the most active ingredients to really support women whose ovaries are retired or removed, and we need to actually bring up all those hormone levels again. And this is the one that we've done a lot of clinical trials on as well. So let's look at some of this. We don't need to look at the label so much. But this here is, in addition to the studies and the trials that we've done, it's really worth noting that not many papers on herbal products actually get published or mentions from conventional groups and journals. And our studies on the Feminescence Pro post have gotten those mentions, both in biomedical journals, NAMS, the menopause group in North America, and some other places. So just to draw some attention there, it's pretty exciting. And here's a link to a great video for patients to understand a little bit better how that whole HPAO axis works and how the feminescence works. I'll let you view that at another time. All right, so let's talk about these studies a little bit. One of the big ones that we're most proud of here is that using the Feminescence Pro for up to 4 months, we saw improvements in both estradiol, progesterone. We saw decreases in FSH, as you can see here on the bottom graph, and improvements in thyroid and adrenals. It looks like it supports, again, across the whole system. We also saw that, again, according to the Cooperman index that I mentioned before, we see a decrease in symptoms of patient-reported symptoms in menopausal issues such as hot flashes and night sweats, supporting libido, which we know is really important, reducing vaginal dryness, and then improving mood, the anxiety and depression that people describe that happens. I wasn't anxious until menopause hit. That's what we're looking at helping manage with those hormone fluctuations, the cortisol, all those pieces. One note about vaginal dryness, that's not necessarily someone's going to notice an improvement in right away. And that's where I think using it for 3 and 4 months, we're going to see an improvement there. I explain it to patients in a way that we have to, if your estrogen and progesterone and everything is really low, it's going to take some time to get back to balance and build the levels up enough that we're going to see some of the downstream tissue effects and the relubrication of those tissues. So I like to warn them ahead. Some things are going to be more immediate and other things are going to take some time. We just have to have a little patience. We also saw improvements in heart health, which primarily we know heart disease risk, heart attack, blood pressure, all of those things start going up as soon as a gal crosses that menopause threshold. So anything we can do to help protect the cardiovascular system, and we'll see in a minute the bone structure and bone density, is hugely valuable in practice. And we saw here an increase in HDL levels and a decrease in LDL and triglyceride levels with the use of the Feminescence Pro. One of the things that I believe makes so much impact from the Maca Go is that because it's acting on the entire endocrine system, we see improvements in the female hormones, but then also improvements with the more classic stress hormones like cortisol. And I'm thinking that's where we start seeing these better changes with body weight reduction. We saw a 6% average decrease there, better blood pressure. So if you think about lowering the cortisol, that's going to make women put fat on in the middle, that visceral adipose tissue that's terrible once you pass like 45 years old. Forget about menopause, it starts earlier. But then also that creep of blood pressure that we see in postmenopausal women. So because we're addressing that whole system, I think it can really affect a bunch of other things incidentally. I like to describe hormones as a web, a spider's web. And if I tug and pull over here a little bit, the whole web, everything is going to start adjusting and getting moved around a bit. If you don't know Dr. Kelly Brogan, she's an integrative psychiatrist in New York. And what I think is most interesting in this quote is the piece that says, this plant-based intervention serves to re-educate the complex feedback loops between her brain and endocrine system. So we all know the importance of hormones and neurotransmitters and how important those amino acids are as the building blocks of producing all of those. And as you remember from that earlier slide showing that high concentration of amino acids in Feminescence Pro, that's one of those key elements that I think really supports its consistency and efficacy. The other thing I want to point out here is that she mentions that rebalancing, right? And that re-education of the complex system. Where I see this in reality and clinically is in that, let's take the Feminescence ProHarmony, for example. We have a gal start on 1 twice a day, kind of the standard dose. And that after a couple months, her cycles are regular, PMS is better. And then she's like, but now I'm kind of feeling like I'm a little out of balance again. After 3 or 4 months of good balance, we've kind of re-educated the system. So I actually end up oftentimes bringing people down to a maintenance dose, right? Twice a day was needed to get to that balance, but it may not be needed, and it actually may be too much to actually maintain that balance, and the pendulum can swing too far. So after 3 or 4 months of good balance, I will often try to decrease the dose to a maintenance, because their body truly is getting re-educated and back into balance, so that we don't have to push as hard. And the same thing can go for the postmenopause formula. 2 twice a day, which is the standard dose with it, may be necessary to get things managed and get them in a good spot. But oftentimes, after they've been in that good spot for 2 or 3 months, I will often have them actually decrease a little bit, which is more affordable for them. But it also may be all that's needed to maintain that nice balance going forward. So again, working to not just throw band-aids on, but really address that root cause issue for gals and men, but we'll get there. Alrighty. And because we know we need to support not just mood, but in the brain and the heart in postmenopausal women, we also saw improvements in bone health as well. So after 4 months, we saw improvements with T scores and Z scores. So you'll see here those improvements after they've been on it for a few months. So would love to do some more studies on this, but it's very promising here with some of the early data. And then, of course, again, across support across the board, we see the balancing the female hormones and the stress hormones, and they're going to tug at the strings of all those other hormones. So thyroid function, iron absorption, we see some improvements with testosterone, and the stress response with cortisol. And that is another thing. We do often give people a little bit of some guidance around if they're on thyroid medications or blood pressure medications. It's not a huge clinical impact, but if those patients are on things for blood pressure or thyroid, and you start them on the Feminescence, any of the formulas, I will often then make sure I'm checking a TSH or just monitoring blood pressure and stuff, because 3, 4 months down the road, you might actually see that they don't need as much, and that you need to adjust some of those medications, because we're really addressing these other root hormone causes and the cortisol levels and those kinds of things. So just another clinical aside for you. All right, so let's look at the ProPerry now. So this is more for our perimenopausal women. They started, hopefully they're in their late 40s, early 50s, and they've started getting night sweats and hot flashes. They've started getting the irregular periods. This is the formula for them. Slightly different blend of those Maca phenotypes, because with these gals, it's about balancing those massive fluctuations that they're experiencing, not necessarily just working to increase everything like our postmenopausal gals. So just as a kind of think about that white line that we looked at earlier with when you're trying to decide what formula is for who. This is just the ingredient list. I'll let you take a peek at that in the need for making sure we're staying on time today. And then again, we did studies here, and you're going to see that it has some of the highest success rates for any herbal product in relation to those perimenopausal symptoms. Again, the libido, the hot flashes and night sweats, the dryness. Again, some of this is going to be really immediate, and others are going to take a little while to get there. But as long as everything's on that right trajectory, I tell people just hang in there and let's do it. I will say that with the ProPerry, I find myself doing the most kind of dosing changes for people. 1 twice a day, which is the standard dose, is perfect for most women. That's why it's the standard dose. But some gals might need 2 twice a day. Some may only need 1 in the morning. So don't be afraid to kind of go up and down. Don't do that all the time, though. I often say we got to leave it at 1 dose for at least 2 weeks, if not a month, because think about hormones. They take a month. They're on a month-long cycle. So changing the dose too frequently can really confuse the system, but leaving it at 1 dose for a period of time, at least 2 weeks, if not longer, can let the body kind of find its new balance point, and then you can decide, do I need more support? What do we need to do next? Again, back to some of the trials we did here, we saw improvements with the estradiol and progesterone, the thyroid and adrenal hormones. So it really echoes what we saw with the postmenopausal formula as well. And we did a crossover study with perimenopausal women to find out that whether they took a placebo for a few months and then switched to the Feminescence, or Feminescence and then to placebo, what would happen. And we saw that whenever they were taking the perimenopause formula, they actually had improvements with their estrogen and progesterone. We also know, similar to what we found with the postmenopausal, we see improvements in like I said, the hormones, the lipid levels, blood sugar balance. So there's something going on there with insulin and blood sugar, better body weight, cortisol, etc. Again, just another graphical representation for you. Improvements with HDL, LDL, blood pressure, and triglycerides. Everything is moving in the right direction. And last but not least, let's talk about the ProHarmony, which I alluded to before, but we need to support these gals in yet a different way, whether it's just simply managing PMS and just having nice, normal, regular cycles that are not impacting their daily life when they happen, or it's our more complicated gals with PCOS or fertility needs. This is blended to manage those normal hormone fluctuations in younger women. So it supports all of these different areas. We see it with supporting menstrual cycles, like I said, acne. This is something that, as every good natural practitioner knows, you may get something get a little bit worse before it gets better. And so with gals who I'm using it with for acne, do think about telling them that as we're moving things around and as we're rebalancing hormones, the acne might get a little bit worse before it gets better, so that they're prepared and they're not calling you panicked that what you gave them now is causing them acne. It's all a process of moving it out. And that's where something like the PhQuintessence or flax meal or fiber or DIM, something else that will actually help them clear some of that stuff out while you're doing the balancing in the background, can be really, really supportive for these gals in particular. I've also used it with a lot of fertility patients, helping them get pregnant. We don't know all of the mechanisms and how it works, but we affectionately call any number of babies Feminescence babies, because we see clinically that we help gals get pregnant regularly. And then, of course, we have the Revolution Pro, which is our men's formula, because women are not the only ones who need hormone balancing. So this, of course, does not have the Maca Go in it. We're not trying to increase estrogen levels for these guys, but it's an entirely different blend to support men's hormones, the adrenals, prostate health, all the things that we're looking for them as they age. And quite honestly, and I'm just going to throw this in here as well, because we do have transgendered patients and customers, and you want to give them the formula for where they're going. So if you've got a transgendered male patient, the Revolution Pro is for that person, because you want to support testosterone in the system versus estrogen. Someone who's going male to female, you're going to want potentially using the Harmony or something like that, or the postmenopause actually is probably more often the right one, to increase those estrogen levels and support that physiology that they're going for. So total side note, but important differentiation. Like, you really need to think clinically, what am I trying to do with this person? And then find the formula for them. And again, we have training webinars that we can go over at some other time. So for men, who are you thinking about for this? You're thinking about young guys, teens and 20s, people who you definitely don't want to start them on testosterone, but they need that energy and performance, and they need to have some improvements there. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing more and more guys in their 20s and 30s with lower testosterone levels, but they're too young to start, in my opinion, on testosterone replacement. We got to figure out the root cause. You've got to fix out the stress, like the endocrine disruption, like what is happening for them that at 25, they're not producing enough testosterone. This is when I pull out the Revolution Pro for those people. You're stressed out businessmen, midlife kind of guys. And then of course, once you kind of hit the andropause and those levels start naturally declining, this is going to help support those guys as well with testosterone, adrenals, growth hormone, libido, and all of those kinds of things. So switching gears here really quickly, I'll just kind of peruse through the other items that we saw on that previous slide. The PhQuintessence, it's a part of supporting hormones. You got to support the terrain. And so I think about this, it's one of the most gentle detoxers that I use in my practice. We all have our heavy hitters, but when someone has a lot of acne, or they get menstrual migraines, or there's like hormonal noise that we need to clean out, but you can't mobilize a bunch of stuff and make it worse, this is when I pull out the PhQuintessence as a very gentle cleaning, cleansing, alkalizing agent that will help very gently remove things and bind things and get them out of the system. What is it exactly? It's a very concentrated form of organic non-GMO alfalfa with all the grass allergens and phytoestrogens removed. You've got basically a very concentrated alfalfa that's got lots of kind of chlorella, antioxidants, very nutrient dense, and we know that it helps really bind things up, remove them from the system, and it's a green. So those patients who just won't eat enough greens, this is a product for them. 3 capsules a day, 2 at night, 1 in the morning, and you can make up for some of the greens that they're not eating in their diet, and you also then get some of that detox and cleansing support for them. Just a quick slide on improving fertility. You got to consider your egg bearer, your sperm donor, and the whole team. And so we've got the male product, the female, and then oftentimes I have both of them on the PhQuintessence. And then Jan Roberts, I just put some of her books down here because, again, she's in Australia, but she has done so much work on preconception health and all of that they're all worth checking out. And last but not least, we got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to cruise through some of the really exciting things with melatonin, which again, all a part of that hormonal process in our body, and also necessary to address in any number of our stressed out patients. So it's one of the only, or it is the only plant-based melatonin on the market. And if you haven't seen the news today, I encourage you to check out the Apple News Spotlight on melatonin and the immune system and COVID infections. So there's some very exciting stuff that just got released today. We're not going to talk about that, but it's there on the web if you want to find it. Where does your melatonin come from? So kind of like the Feminescence and all the phenotypes and the importance of your farming and everything, same thing applies here. Again, we're going vertical integration from seed to shelf, full control of where it's grown, how we concentrate it, all the way through to the manufacturing end. And it's fully bioidentical. Plant melatonin is the same as human melatonin, but without all the derivatives. The way most melatonin is made, it's synthetic and it's derived from petrochemicals. So it's a very different kind of environment that we're dealing with. The other thing I like about the plant-based melatonin is because the melatonin is actually in the cell matrix, you kind of get this sustained or slow release because as it's naturally digested, you end up getting melatonin absorbed into the system, which I think differentiates the Herbitonin from other melatonins in that you don't end up with that, like the sustained release, you don't end up with that midnight waking because you have this nice steady release of it through the night. So that is one of the things I do love. We also know, just so you know too, melatonin we know is circadian rhythm based. It's made in response to light and dark, and we always think about it for sleep, but it's a really potent antioxidant. It's an immunomodulator, and it's starting to be a lot of interesting research is going to be coming out about melatonin in the coming years and probably months, and it's going to be one to watch for sure. What we do know is that humans basically don't produce it for the first 3 months of their lives. So breastfeeding and getting it in mom's milk is really important for that first 3 months. We also know that melatonin receptors are actually on pretty much every cell in the body. And we actually don't just produce it in the pineal gland. It's produced in the gut. It's produced in the bone marrow. There's a number of different sites around the body. And it may be why in babies with colic, they may not be getting enough melatonin because it's actually been shown to release or relax the smooth muscle cells in the intestine. So keep an eye out on some of this stuff in the coming months and years. Here we just have a breakdown of how we produce melatonin through the course of our life. We know none from 0 to 3 months, and then children are producing way more than any grown-up, around 0.8 milligrams through childhood and adolescence, and it drops to about 0.3 through our middle age years, and then around 55 it goes all the way down to 0.1 milligrams. No wonder that older individuals have sleep issues, and we start seeing more circadian rhythm disruptions. This is the group that I'm often using our physiologic dose of Herbitonin with, the 0.3 milligram, just almost as a hormone replacement, getting them back to that midlife level so we have better antioxidant support, sleep support, all those other pieces, but not super physiologic doses. More and more of the research is showing more is not better. More melatonin is why people wake up in the night or have nightmares in the night. It's not necessarily necessary. And there were patent issues as to why we couldn't get low dose until recently, because until recently and through the 90s, there was a patent on any melatonin under 1 milligram, and that would have made it more expensive to get something low dose than the higher doses. And so that's why it's kind of new on the market, even though there's a lot of research, particularly out of this one person who patented it from MIT, that 0.3 milligrams in those low physiologic doses actually are just as effective, if not more, than the higher doses. So just some more food for thought there. Your dosing is going to be very dependent on what's going on for the person. So too high of a dose is going to create nightmares or grogginess in the morning. So again, backing it down. If it's for jet lag and things, of course, you're going to use higher doses because you're trying to match those time zones together. I'm going to let you read through some of this so that we don't run too short on time. Some dosing information around jet lag, and just some quick evidence, just like the Feminescence, we've been doing research on the Herbitonin. And I want to just share a few preliminary studies that we've seen with the Herbitonin. One of the first analysis we did with the Herbitonin was just comparing that of the ORAC value, which many of you probably are familiar with. It was for quite some time the validated standard laboratory assessment on antioxidant ability, until it was being misused by companies who were inferring that customers or consumers could replace essential foods and fruits and vegetables with a product and a dietary supplement. So it's fallen out of fashion, but nonetheless, the ORAC value of the Herbitonin was much, much higher than any of the synthetic melatonins that we tested. Additionally, when we looked at the ability and the antioxidant capacity using DPPH, which is now the recognized method for stabilizing free radicals and measuring a product's antioxidant capacity, again, we saw that the amount of free radicals that the Herbitonin could scavenge in relationship to synthetic melatonins was far and away higher. The next study that we did, an analysis also using DPPH, we compared Herbitonin Pro to vitamin C. And in this analysis, the intent was to compare vitamin C's performance to the Herbitonin Pro and then see if you mixed them together, was there a synergistic, additive, or negative reaction when they were combined. And as you can see from the first 3 columns, they all had their own capacity when they were alone, and the Herbitonin outperformed the C. And then we did 2 different concentrations of C and melatonin. If you did them singly and added them together, this was the antioxidant capacity. When you combined them, it was the same at this concentration. But if you increase the concentration of C, then we actually saw this synergistic bump. So you had the 2 singles, and then when you mixed them all together, the C and the melatonin somehow were working together, and we actually had a synergistic effect in their antioxidant capacity. So just very interesting, needs a lot more research and hunting down. Quick reminder from school, all the different types of antioxidants. And the important thing to remember here is that vitamin C is a primary antioxidant with some secondary capabilities, but where melatonin excels is it does all 3 of these activities. So it is very much a multifunctional antioxidant, likely why we see it having such far-reaching activities in the body, both from an antioxidant standpoint, but then that immunomodulating standpoint. Again, need to elucidate and do more research on that front. And then another study that we did with the Herbitonin Pro against the synthetic melatonins was looking at the ability to mitigate intracellular reactive oxygen species, or ROS. You remember from school, those ROS are byproducts of cellular metabolism, normal byproducts, but the overproduction of ROS we know is associated with cellular and DNA damage and likely aids in the development of cancer, cardiovascular issues, neurodegenerative conditions, etc. So in this graph, we want the higher levels actually indicate greater cellular damage, showing progressive worsening damage over time. So we actually want to see more capacity at reducing ROS. And the Herbitonin Pro was able to stave off that cellular damage far better than the synthetic melatonins, and that the concentrations of both the Herbitonin Pro and the synthetic melatonin had essentially the same results. We're showing that more is not necessarily better. So whether you're doing 20 milligrams or 30 milligrams, that curve is not that much different. It's really about the dosing and just having it on board at all. And last but not least, we did an analysis comparing the ability of the COX-2 enzyme activity. Remember that cyclooxygenase 2 is an enzyme that acts to speed up production of prostaglandins, so it plays a key role in promoting inflammation in the body. And when we block that activity, we reduce inflammation. And here again, the Herbitonin Pro was shown to decrease the activity of that COX-2, or sorry, decrease it much more than the synthetic. Sorry, I almost misspoke there. And then last but not least, a quick slide here to again look at some of the differences that we've seen with the Herbitonin plant-based melatonin versus synthetic melatonin. And we're happy to share these slides with you. Again, they're going to be sent to you, and we'll have more and more of this data coming out through the year. These were our preliminary studies, but we're really excited to start releasing them. And so look for more in coming months. Again, plant-based, water and lipid soluble. We know that melatonin and the Herbitonin in particular can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is one of the reasons it likely has very far-reaching effects. And then, of course, we're going to keep it clean, no excipients or binders, and we want to make sure we're taking good care of you and all of our customers and patients who we're using it with. So with that, I will wrap it up. We may have a couple minutes for questions if there's anything really pressing. Otherwise, we'll get them to you afterwards. And if you want to do an individualized training webinar, please reach out to us. We're happy to do that. And remember that me and the medical team are available if you've got clinical questions. Our customer service department can kind of connect you with me or someone else to help you with like a particular clinical conundrum or question. So with that, I think we'll turn it back, bring Kaylee back on, and see what we got.
Yes, hello, thank you. That was amazing. We had, I think, a ton of questions come through. I know we have a couple minutes. We might be, we might just, I'd say let's just keep it conscious of everyone's time, because I don't know if I could pick one out of the whole list of things that came through. We did get a lot of comments though saying like, what a great presentation, and thank you for sharing this knowledge and sharing all the information with us and the attendees as well. So I want to thank you again, because the feedback is always great when you're here with us. But
thank you, and thank you for everyone. Thank you for everyone for bearing with me while I was talking fast and speeding through. So I'll be happy to answer all those questions and we'll get them to you.
Yeah, no, I think it was great. I think we appreciate the knowledge coming at us like that. And again, it's recorded. Everyone will get it in a follow-up email, so we can go back. You can go back and watch it on your own time when you'd like. And we've collected the questions that have come through, so I will kind of condense them and get them all off to you, Dr. Fahoum, and hopefully we can include those in the follow-up as well as the landing page, which is on fullscript.com/webinars, which is where you'll be able to find the recording as well. So yes, thank you again. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. And any other questions too, you can reach out to webinars@fullscript.com, and we will try to answer them as fast as we can. But now, is there anything else you want to include before we go?
No, everyone should go and enjoy their day.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. And as you said, enjoy the rest of your day.